For tens of thousands of years, our world was locked in a slumber of white iron. This was not a barren wasteland, nor a time of darkness.
It was a magnificent, global cathedral, where the cold was not an affliction, but a sovereign king.
It was an era of giants, a time when the earth itself seemed to hold its breath, preserving a dynasty of titans in a perfect, frozen stasis. But the tragedy of this age is that its very perfection was a trap.
The stability was an illusion, and the strength of these rulers would become the very instrument of their doom. Now, let the chronicle of this lost ruler begin. To understand the magnitude of the fall, we must first stand in awe of the height from which they fell.
We look back at the Ice Age and see a struggle for survival, but for the rulers of that epoch, it was a golden age. The ice sheets were not merely glaciers. They were the walls of a vast, continental citadel.
By locking away the oceans, the ice revealed a hidden world, a supercontinent of connectivity, where land bridges spanned the seas, allowing dynasties to conquer the globe.
The true seat of this power was the Mammoth Steppe.
It was not a desert of snow, but a vast, arid grassland that circled the crown of the planet like a golden wreath.
This was the Frozen Throne. The air was dry, the skies were clear, and the ground was firm permafrost.
A concrete foundation upon which an empire of immense weight could be built.
This biome was a miracle of productivity, a relentless engine that turned sunlight and cold into massive vitality. It was a kingdom designed specifically for the grand, the heavy, and the specialized.
According to Bergman's rule, species in colder regions evolve larger body masses, minimizing heat loss. It demanded thick fur, immense energy reserves, and a philosophy of endurance. For millennia, the seasons turned with a predictable, rhythmic certainty.
The sun was distant, the wind was cruel, but the world was stable.
The rulers of this land believed, as all empires do, that their dominion was eternal.
They could not know that the ice beneath their feet was not a foundation, but a clock,
ticking slowly toward a midnight that would consume them all.
Into this cathedral of cold walked the actors of our tragedy, a cast of characters so grand that we call them Megafauna, a dry term that fails to capture their majesty. They were the Titanic Brotherhood, an aristocracy of giants who divided the world among themselves.
They were not merely inhabitants of the steppe. They were its lords, its architects, and its prisoners. At the center of this brotherhood stood the Woolly Mammoth, the undisputable monarch of the north. It was more than an animal. It was a mobile fortress, a hairy mountain that moved with the slow, inevitable momentum of a glacier. Its philosophy was one of sheer, overwhelming presence.
It did not hide from the winter. It wore the winter as a cloak.
These monarchs were the keystone of the entire kingdom. Their massive tusks acted as snowplows, clearing the ground to expose the grass beneath. an act of benevolence that allowed smaller subjects to survive the deep freeze.
They trampled the saplings of trees, preventing the forests from rising, thereby maintaining the open visibility of their own empire.
They created the very world they ruled. Orbiting these suns were the lesser kings, each specialized to a degree of perfection that borders on the artistic. The woolly rhinoceros, a tank of muscle and temper, patrolled the frozen plains like an armored knight, its horn a weapon of brutal singularity.
The giant bison, herds numbering in the millions, turned the steppe into a living sea of fur and breath. These herbivores were the fuel of the dynasty, converting the dry, nutritious grasses of the Ice Age into tons of meat and muscle.
And because the prey were titans, the hunters had to become monsters. This era birthed the most terrifying coalition of executioners the Earth has ever known. The Smilodon, with its saber teeth, was not built for the chase, but for the assassination. Its philosophy was precision, a single, devastating strike to the throat of a giant.
Alongside it stalked the cave lion and the short-faced bear, tyrants who enforced the brutal laws of this frozen court.
They were the victims of their own perfection.
The cold had forced them to specialize so intensely that they had become inseparable from the conditions that created them.
The mammoth was built for dry cold, not wet heat.
The Smilodon was built to wrestle giants, not to chase swift, small deer. They had traded adaptability for mastery.
They were a lock and key system, where every predator was perfectly fitted to its prey.
And every herbivore was perfectly fitted to the specific flora of the mammoth steppe.
They stood at the summit of existence, a glittering, terrifying hierarchy of strength.
To watch them in the pale light of the Pleistocene sun was to witness a biological machine running at absolute efficiency.
They were the masters of the ice, confident in their thick fur and their massive bones.
But history teaches us a cruel lesson. The more specialized the ruler, the more fragile the throne. They were the lords of the steppe, unaware that they were standing on a foundation that was about to melt away beneath their feet.
As the global empire fractured, the war for me ceased to be a campaign, a wise-side memory.
The vast, endless highway of the steppe was gone, replaced by a broken archipelago of shrinking islands.
Small patches of high ground where the old world still lingered, surrounded by the rising tide of forests and marshes.
It was here, in these last bastions of the Ice Age, that the Titanic Brotherhood gathered for their final stand.
The conflict was defined by a terrifying density. The social order of the Megafauna collapsed. The dignified distance between herds evaporated.
Mammoths, bison, and horses were forced into uneasy proximity, sharing the same dwindling patches of nutritious grass.
And the same muddy, shrinking water holes. Tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The silence of the steppe was replaced by the bellows of stressed, starving giants. Their aggression spiked by the cramping of their world. In this era of desperation, the rules of engagement were rewritten.
The noble hunt, the strategic interplay between predator and prey, devolved into a brutal brawl.
The predators, starving as their prey grew scarce and gaunt, lost their caution. The Sabertooth, once the surgeon of the grasslands, was forced to become a butcher.
Driven by hunger, they took reckless risks, attacking targets too large or too dangerous. The short-faced bear, the tyrant who once ruled by mere presence,
Found its intimidation tactics failing against herbivores who had nothing left to lose.
We can imagine the scene. A muddy, trampled oasis where the water is foul with silt.
A weakened mammoth, the matriarch of a dying line, defends the water from a desperate pack of dire wolves.
There is no strategy here. Only the raw, frantic violence of the starving. The clash of bodies, the snapping of bone, and the roar of defiance. It was a chaotic melee fought in the muck. Cinematic dark threat. And the muck itself was the deadliest combatant. As the animals fought for position, the softened earth swallowed them. We found their remains today in these death traps.
Mass graves, where predator and prey are fused together in stone.
They did not die in glorious combat on the open plain. They died thrashing in the glue-like mud.
A saber-tooth clamped onto a mammoth, both pulled down by the weight of a world that had turned against them.
It was a war without victors. The grandeur of the Ice Age was not ending with a dignified bow, but with a violent, muddy, and heart-breaking struggle for the last breath of cold air. Eventually, the chaos subsided, not into peace, but into silence.
The great sieges at the waterholes ended, leaving only bones to be buried by the encroaching silt.
The forests completed their conquest, draping a thick green shroud over the battlefields of the Pleistocene.
The war for Refugia did not have a winner. It simply ran out of soldiers.
One by one, the lights of the Megafauna flickered and died. The mammoth, the rhinoceros, the sabertooth, they did not migrate to a new land.
They migrated into memory.
For millions of years, the earth had vibrated with the footfalls of giants. Now, the wind blew through the birch trees and found no resistance.
The landscape was empty. The green desert had won.
The complex, interlocking dynasty of the Ice Age had been dismantled, replaced by a smaller, quieter world. The throne was not usurped by a stronger rival. It was simply left vacant,
Dissolving into the mist of history, leaving behind only the echo of a grandeur we can scarcely imagine. And so, the ice retreated to the poles, taking its children with it into the dark.
This spot feels ancient, doesn't it?
It really does. Imagine what secrets are buried right under our feet.
They were the monarchs of a lost earth, a nobility that could not bend, and so was broken. The ice melted, and the world moved on. But the silence they left behind still screams of their absence.